Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this session on leading change management in schools. We really appreciate and welcome everyone joining. We have a fantastic group of folks speaking with us today. To make sure we really ground in a shared understanding of change management, we wanted to start by sharing a definition of it and using that shared vocabulary for us to make sure we ground in a root in an understanding of what we mean when we talk about change management. We define it as how leaders approach defining, pursuing, achieving, and sustaining systemic change across stakeholders. And with that, we want to get right into it, and we warmly welcome our panelists. And actually would love to start with you, Christopher. Have you introduced yourself?
Hang on. Hi, I'm Christopher Hand, Director of Assessment, Evaluation, and Testing for Liberty Public Schools in Liberty, Missouri. We're a school district just north of Kansas City, full of Liberty High School Blue Jays and Liberty North Eagles. So I want to thank you, Doug, for having us on today, and really excited to share the work that we've done in our district and learn from others from questions that we have.
Jessica, we'll turn to you and have you introduce yourself.
Hi all, I'm Jessica Meisenheimer, and I am the Director of Special Programs in the same district that Christopher mentioned, Liberty Public Schools in Missouri. And I am excited to be here. Real quick, a lot of people ask me what exactly is the Director of Special Programs, so just a little familiarity with that. It is actually not special education. It's all of the other specialized programs that we offer for students. So for example, that's overseeing the gifted program, our English language learners, counseling and social work, 504s, just a variety of other programs that we offer for specialized populations that does not include special education.
And Chris, you?
Hi, welcome to everybody. My name is Chris Gabriel, and I'm a elementary building principal at Lillian Schumacher Elementary in Liberty, Missouri, same school district as Christopher and Jessica. Very excited to be with everybody today. This is my 20th year in education and my 9th year as the building principal at Lillian Schumacher.
Thank you. Douglas, we'd love to hear from you and a little bit about your role and connection as well.
Sure thing. Hello all, my name's Doug Hassett. I lead the strategic advising practice at Panorama, so I have the distinct privilege of working alongside Christopher, Chris, Dr. M, truly, at the table with them to understand and think through how to better support their staff and students in social emotional learning, multi-tier system of support, and beyond. So privileged to be here today to kind of speak to and celebrate some of the work they've done over the last couple of years and the work they continue to do in Liberty.
Thank you. And we really want to thank everyone for including the panelists, making themselves available to join us today. We have a wonderful group. Our plan is for us to be able to spend this session and spend really about the next 20 or so minutes with questions that we've heard from a number of folks, as well as different insights that we've gathered in our conversation, reflection on our partnership, as well as make sure we provide time for a live question and answer session from the folks who have attended this session. And at the end, we'll make sure to share resources from Panorama that folks can take back to their districts. And we want to make sure that today represents really just one data point in this continuing conversation, escalating toward and thinking about how folks can work on thinking critically about their practice and implementing that specifically in their roles in terms of leading change within their districts and their communities. Please note that during the session, if you're attending today via Zoom, you'll be able to type your questions into the questions module, and we strongly encourage folks to participate that way. You have the ability to upvote questions, which will really amplify our ability to see that and the visibility to help us to select the questions most relevant to this group. We'll also make sure to save some of these questions until the interactive Q&A session as well. So having heard from you all about your backgrounds and a little bit of your work, love to start with the panel and hear from you all about how do you begin the process of leading change?
I think the biggest piece about leading change is beginning with just the mindsets of what you have with your staff as you roll through that change, and really having and thinking through, why are we going through this change? What if as we go through this change, and why not going through this change? But and also thinking about through the obstacles that will happen as you go through that change. So I think mainly you have to understand that as you're leading change, you have to seek the unexpected. That's really important. Often we're faced with problems that do not have the easiest solutions while we go through change, but we have to have quality mindsets, like Principal Gabriel has in his building, and Lillian Schumacher and Dr. M has in her staff, to really share that with staff and really have that move forward. Chris, what are some things that you do about leading change in your building that's effective?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pieces with it that's helped us along our way is you kind of have to paint that vision, right? You have to set that stake in the sand out in the future of what do we see ourselves becoming, or what is it that we want to do or achieve in partnership with our parents and our students and our staff. That helps, I think, avoid the change for change sake piece of that sometimes comes out in education. So for us, it's really a visioning piece of where do we want to go and who do we want to become. That helps kind of paint that path that we're going to follow on the change journey.
I think I like the part what you said though about the change for change sake, but it's also to make sure that we're making change to get different results, because we've had these similar results for so long that this change is going to help us find different pieces within that. I know Dr. Meisenheimer, you've done that with our work with MTSS. Can you speak to that a little bit about change?
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that, as you guys were talking, that I think our district does really well is we meet people where they are and we honor the experience that they bring to the table. And I think that's been really important in how we've been able to make change in our district. We definitely ask people kind of what their vision is, and then we help tie that, as Chris was saying, to kind of the broader vision of the district. We also allow for a lot of building level autonomy. So while the district kind of sets that overall vision that Chris was talking about, and then we support that with tools like Panorama, we also give each building then the autonomy to build that system that's going to work for their specific population, their specific staff. And I think that's been really helpful in leading overall change for us.
I really like that point around thinking about doing this more so avoiding change for change's sake. It's really for the purpose of doing this to achieve different results, and specifically using that as a benchmark for evaluating your progress toward the vision that you've identified. And you're mentioning, Chris Gabriel, about that. So I'm actually curious to hear from you, like how do you go about translating this idea of change, right, and this vision, something that is kind of theoretical? How do you go to translating that into a strategic plan, and then what role does that play in helping to move along this vision to change management?
Yeah, I appreciate where I work very much and the opportunities that we have, and I get to take the things that I'm hearing and I'm collaborating with our staff around, as well as parents and students. I get to take those pieces and kind of help mold that ambiguous thing that's just kind of hanging out there. It's that closing that feedback loop all the way through of this is what we say we needed to do, or an area that we were trying to address. And then continuing to come back and measure ourselves against those, pegs in the sand that we set. It's every building in our district. We have 11 elementaries, and every one of our schools has a very unique and specific makeup of their staff and their student population. So there's not a one size fits all approach that's going to work for any of us. As a building leader, one of my jobs is to facilitate our journey towards an intended outcome. So just really being aware and I'm going to steal a line that Christopher uses often of, accountability is a flashlight, not a hammer. It's not coming in and saying, we said we're going to do this and we're not. It's, hey, this is where we were planning to go, and this is what we thought our outcome was going to be. How are we doing with that? And what adjustments can we make based on our current reality?
And I think it's also a piece too, what Chris has done at Lillian Schumacher, especially, is the fact that he has a mentality though that, it's okay to fail forward. It's okay to fall down 7 and stand up 8. We're going to take some risk taking. I think to incorporate change in a district, you have to allow some risk taking to take place. And we have to, when we're looking for creative solutions, we have to sometimes find out that our initial ideas were flawed, and they actually sometimes turn out to be much better than we ever expected. Would you agree, Dr. Meisenheimer?
Absolutely. And I think part of in honoring people where they are is allowing them to be able to make those mistakes in a safe place. So creating a leadership team that knows and that it's okay and it's actually favored to go ahead and it's okay to make mistakes, and that's how we're going to learn and get better, I think is really important. Tying back to, so Mike, you had originally asked about the strategic plan, and just to kind of one thing that I was thinking about when you asked that, that's been really helpful in our district is we just launched our new strategic plan this school year. So we've had the opportunity to kind of dig into a new vision for a lot of different things in a lot of different areas that are important to us. But what I thought was really great in our process as a district is we started with a graduate profile. So kind of mapping out what characteristics do we want our students to have when they leave us? So what are the gifts and the tools that we need to give our students when they leave us? And then we built all of the kind of the action steps of the strategic plan around that graduate profile. And I think that has been a really great way to map out, like going back to what Chris said about the vision, having a vision of what we want our students to look like when they are in the community and creating kind of that next generation for our community. That has been a great way to then kind of backtrack of what are the things that we need to do to ensure that we, you know, sustain the kind of graduates and then later community members that we want to have. So I just wanted to add that because I thought that was a great place to start with a vision of just centering it always around the students themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that profile of a graduate in our district was huge because it allowed people to not cling to the models of the past, but really look to the models of the future with a cohesive group to do it in. And like you said, like Dr. Meisenheimer just said, it with focus clearly on student results and student successes.
I think one of the biggest pieces, you know, in that change process is we're all going to have to let go or unhinge from past practice that has been great for us. Or might still be very effective in what we're doing, but there's going to be an evolution of thinking and practice along that change journey. And you know what Christopher referenced earlier about falling down 7 and getting up 8, that's what we should be, hopefully, I guess, we should be asking our students to do that every day. And why shouldn't we also engage in that as adults? I've tried this out, I've done my best. I'm doing my best every day. We assume goodwill, right? I've done my best every day, and it maybe just didn't work. So let's study that, figure it out, and do better the next time, or do different the next time.
Yeah, and you all are really speaking to different instances of this journey, this change management journey, right? And it seems like we have a lot of interest in attendees who want to hear a little bit more about like how do we start with that vision, translate that to a strategic plan, and then as we're moving along that continuum, you know, what are some of the challenges you all experience? And I would imagine some of that is really thinking about the human elements that come to this. And I know, Doug, you, for instance, work with a lot of partners specifically around thinking about some of the more technical as well as adaptive challenges that might arise as part of change management. Can you share a little bit about your perspective and what that has looked like?
Sure. Well, I just want to first off kind of pause and bright line this piece that Dr. M just mentioned, which is the strategic plan, because, you know, for those of you who are, you know, teachers or school leaders out there, maybe identifying with Chris Gabriel, you know, strong principal. So like Chris, you might do some of the work that you do already, but if you do it without guidance or a district level kind of North Star to point to, it's going to be an added challenge for you to build buy-in and cohesiveness, and it's going to be tough to scale it. But just that, you know, we kind of glossed over it, but Dr. M saying we've got some kind of strategic plan that we can point to. Portrait of a Graduate is a common one we're seeing across the country now. It doesn't need to be specifically SEL or MTSS, but if it's something concrete like a Portrait of the Graduate, that's going to enable Chris Gabriel and his peers to do their thing in their style and point to the same, you know, North Star. And that is what is going to enable Dr. M and Christopher, you all, to see what's working, what should we keep doing, stop doing, and start doing. You know, so I just want to like pause and name that one of the prerequisites to sustaining change, which I see as a question that we have, is having some standardized district level vision or statement for where we're going.
Doug, I love that you said North Star. It was the exact thought that rolled through my head as you were speaking. You know, we're pointing to a direction, and one of the things that I think's helped me be successful in the position that I'm in is people like Jessica and Christopher and other administrators at central office that there's trust. We build that trust together, and that enables us to follow and continue to evaluate our progress towards our North Star, which is successful people, right? We're in the business of people.
Mhm. True. I think the biggest piece also too, what you were just talking about is the people, but also when you have all those arrows going different directions, some of us have that as a district leader. I've been a district central office for 16 years. And when you have arrows going every direction, and if you know anything about quality or data quality, you want those arrows shifting one direction. And that profile of a graduate has really helped us. And by capturing that, really our commitment to social emotional learning and SEL within that profile of a graduate really led us to our critical friends here at Panorama, and looking for tools and resources and playbooks for us to work with students at the ground level to help people like Chris Gabriel at Lillian Schumacher and Dr. Meisenheimer in our work with MTSS. So without that guide, without that framework, and really you can't have rules. Rules stifle innovation. Frameworks allow people to become creative. And so that framework of a profile of a graduate is really, I'd say, helped us take off this year and lift off with our people. Would you agree, Chris?
That darn mute button gets me every time. I apologize. I was talking away, but obviously nobody could hear me.
You know, I wish I had that mute button with you when we meet normally. That'd be really great. But...
Hey, likewise, my friend, likewise. You know, it's just been a powerful tool for us to pull in and be able to, as a building leader, I can look at building data, I can look at classroom data, I can look at individual student data. And so using the tools in the Panorama suite have really helped us just really differentiate for our kids on a different level. You know, we were very comfortable with an academic intervention protocol, and teachers for a long time have been able to diagnose and prescribe with laser-like precision academic intervention. So to be able to take the tools inside of Panorama now and look at it from what are students saying about how they feel in our school, how they relate to other people in our school, and build those structures around that has been a very powerful progression in our support of students.
And I'll just add to that. I think, so when we talk about the strategic plan and we have a graduate profile of what we want our students to look like when they leave us, one of the things that we have to do then is shift our thinking, as Chris was saying, to the whole child when we have them, when they're in our buildings. And we have to be able to have a way to look at all the different aspects of what that child is bringing to the building so that we can craft our educational programming around what their needs are. And as Chris was saying, being able to have tools like Panorama allow us to have the data, to have the conversations about what we need to do instructionally to be able to ensure that wherever our students are today, we're helping build them towards what we want that graduate to look like. And I think we can't do that without the tools to allow our teachers to do that with ease and our data teams to be able to do that with ease, because as we know, sometimes we've got a lot of data, but being able to look at it in a cohesive, efficient way is sometimes the challenge. And so having tools that allow us to do that is really kind of where our district is moving, to enable our teams to have those whole child conversations and then the planning around that.
And really the planning that started with all of the things that you talked about was 2 years ago. We brought a cohesive group together throughout the district that were, you know, everyone from building leaders to teachers to district leaders and students even, and we did a lot of focus groups. And through that focus groups, we found after everything that we were data rich, but learner information poor. And I want to say that again, data rich, but learner information poor. We had all this data about students, but really didn't have a lot of learner information. And so that led us on this journey of towards SEL and Panorama to find those tools, but also that give data to students so they can reflect, because students being in charge of their own data gives us huge outcomes and gives students control of their future. And that's what we really want to have within our district. And I've seen that work done at Chris's building. Talk about that a little bit, Chris, about students being in charge of their own data.
Well, and the other piece I would add to that too is we had to move from feel to real, right?
Mhm.
Like teachers often, I mean, they're,
Awareness to action.
yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
teachers do a phenomenal job of knowing their kids, but to be able to have that actual tangible data and evidence that we could rely on and kind of validate those feelings, that was a catalyst to letting us move into action for our kids. And you know, I would use the example on the academic side of, you know, I have a student that's just a real basic analogy here. I have a student that's struggling to read, right? Well, I think it's phonics. I think they're really struggling with phonics, or maybe it's their phonemic awareness. I'm not sure. Well, we could deliver an academic tool that would screen through and drill down, we, you know, pour that student in the colander and see what things settled out. And then we could take action on those things. And on the social emotional side now with Panoramas as our partner in this process, you know, it sometimes becomes a chicken or egg conversation. Is the social emotional behavioral piece preventing me from accessing learning, or is learning manifesting its, my struggles with learning manifesting itself as a social emotional behavioral challenge? So it's just another layer of really drilling down to the specific individual needs of students. And then that's where that opportunity to lean in as an educator exists. Of, I now know this about you. I've partnered with you to gain this information, and we're going to take action together. And I'm your partner in that process.
Mhm.
Wow. Yeah. In the same way that Doug earlier, really bright line, Dr. Meisenheimer's note about the critical importance of a strategic plan. Also wanted to do that same and highlighting in the chat. We're seeing someone giving you some love for that comment around the data rich, but learner information poor. And I think that distinction really speaks to a subtle nuance between the two, specifically informing how we support students, right? Especially if that is the North Star that we've identified as part of our strategic plan. We want to get there, like provide them what they need to fulfill this profile we've identified as community. So I'd love to hear how you all do that, specifically tying to an earlier note that you mentioned around different people are in different places along their journey, or maybe their affinity or understanding of that nuanced distinction. How do you bring those folks along, depending, you know, while you're also maintaining respect for the diversity or differences in where they are at, or meeting them where they are, like you were mentioning earlier, and honoring their autonomy?
I like what you have on your website. There's a video, I think it's from California. If you go to Panorama's website, they have all these wonderful vignettes about success stories. And one of them, principal says you have to start with the heart before you can get to the head. And I'd like to add a couple pieces to that, is that, you know, the heart is the strongest muscle in the body. And that's why you have to start with that. And we've done a lot of, in terms of PD for teachers, really looking at starting with the heart and really understanding our students. And we've really used a lot of stories and ways to bring them forward, meeting through team meetings, to really look at this data from Panorama to move to that next piece. And by doing that, by starting with the heart and working with teachers, then that flows down to the students. Because if you feed the teachers, the teachers will feed the students. Have you found that in your building to be successful, Chris?
Yeah, you know, and it's, again, it's to come back to this, it's moving that feel to real. So by accessing and engaging the heart and what teachers come to education, I believe, to do, which is to change lives, right? You know, if I share those personal stories, I share those success stories and challenges along the way, I'm connecting with that heart muscle to, you know, encourage you to join us in that journey. And taking the time to do that, you know, we carving out what would be PD time specifically with Panorama, to look at this, the impact that this is having with our kids and for our teachers. You know, it's, we look at that growth on our student, you know, each individual student, their trajectory line of how they're feeling social emotionally about school. That's evidence that we need to validate the work.
I think it's also too, sharing with people that you have to overestimate the risk. A lot of people as human beings, we overestimate the risk of trying something new and trying something different. And SEL and Panorama was something new for us. We had to have them realize that you can't underestimate the risk of standing still. And that's what we were doing, is we were standing still. We were just using academic data. We weren't looking at social emotional data. We're moving towards MTSS and the work that needs to be done there. And I think Jessica and her team has really worked well with our building, specifically in those areas of how do we look at students in a different way throughout our district, to really look at the learner, to really look at the heart, to engage the heart. Jessica, you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I'll say, I think one thing that we've also done as a district is that we'll start with a subset of schools that are interested in starting, even if they don't know what to do yet and they need guidance and training along the way. We start with those schools that are eager to get started. And what we find is that once they kind of get up and going and they're seeing success, then that next subset of schools want to step up and get started too. And so sometimes, even if you don't want to be the first one to jump out the gate, if you see others taking that risk and finding success in it, then you're willing to come along either in the next round or the round after that. And so that approach has been, again, successful in our district by meeting people where they are. So we don't have, as in our district, we don't have, I think, as much as a top-down approach, as much as we're all in this together approach. And we go to people and find where they are, and then we kind of craft that plan as a whole team together, again, with the district support in terms of getting the tools and having the training to be able to make those changes. But I think starting small and starting with people that are ready to get started, we have found success with that. And we have found that in that success in and of itself breeds success, and other people want to be brought along with that. So that's a model that has worked for us.
Yeah, and starting small, Jessica and I have talked about this a lot, is there's a line from the movie Aliens or Alien, where it's big things have small beginnings. And I think that by having small beginnings, whoops, sorry about that, I fell over. The small beginnings occur at those buildings, and they're taking those risks and taking those chances and sharing with other buildings. And that has been a huge focal point for our success here in our district the last 2 years using Panorama.
I just want to make sure everybody heard that you did reference the movie Aliens.
I believe it was the movie after Aliens.
Oh,
it was Alien 3. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad you clarified that. I just wasn't sure which direction we were going to go there. Back to Jeff's point, I think as a building leader, she talked about building upon the strengths and building upon your successes. I definitely feel that as a building principal. I am not asked or told or made to be someone that I am not as a building leader, and that we are not as a school. It's let's take what we're doing and in your current world and in your space, here are these other ideas and options that we have, and how can we build from your success to move forward? I think that's a really key piece that also speaks to our success as a district with this.
And you all have talked really, and you shared and answered some of these questions around a proactive approach to addressing the resistance to change. You start where there already is support, you work from there, you build on that, and then that really helps to sustain a lot of this change. You had mentioned, I heard, success breeds more success. I'm thinking about how you've been able to bring folks along in this more comprehensive approach to supporting students. Curious to hear you all describe a little bit more about the starting with the heart aspect of this, and specifically what are some of the measures that you're looking at, some of the key data points that you take in consideration when you're thinking about supporting students. We'll start there.
So I think intentionally when we talk to people, Panorama through their PD, which is absolutely tremendous, I have to say, and Jessica and Chris would agree with that as well, especially the PD that goes to the building with these one-on-one building work that we'll talk about later. But they gave us a language of how to speak to one another towards the change and resistance to change. And it's really subtle, as if for those of you that have been coaches before, you use these terms in terms of saying, you should probably rather say, I wonder, or I notice, instead of other negative terms. And so when we talk to principals about data, or we talk to teachers about change, I wonder why Timmy is having a hard time in your class. And I notice he's been doing poorly here in these areas of the Panorama survey. And what playbooks, strategies can we use to help Timmy to be successful during that time? Jessica, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think you stated it really well. I think, gosh, I don't know. I don't know what I'd add. You kind of caught me off guard.
Oh, sorry. I don't mean
yeah,
to do
no,
that.
it's all good. Yeah, I think what's been neat about, and we can talk about this too, is we're just beginning to use, we will be using the Student Success Data Dashboard with Panorama going into next year. So we're just embarking on that journey. But what I'm excited about is that having a dashboard that will allow us to look at all the different aspects, as Chris was talking about earlier, of one student, or even being able to look school-wide or district-wide along multiple domains that we're targeting at one time. Because as we know, as Chris mentioned earlier, they all interact with each other. You can't separate a student's academic performance from their behavioral or their social emotional or their attendance. And sometimes when we're having a conversation about why they're struggling in reading, if we don't have all the different data points together at one time, then we miss what might actually be causing the struggle in reading. It might be that, wow, we didn't realize they were late every single day, and that's when the reading block is happening. Or gosh, like they seem to be feeling ill right at the start of math time every single day. And so I think being able to have the tools, so starting off with Panorama with the SEL survey brought a richness to our conversations that I don't think we'd had before. But I think now moving into having this greater dashboard, it puts all of that data in one place so that we can have more cohesive conversations around decisions that we need to make, not just for individual students, but for school-wide decisions. So are we seeing spikes in the cafeteria? Are we seeing, recess time is a struggle for us? And then what actions can we take to make change?
Jessica, that's interesting you said that, because of the ESSA Act, we have targeted schools throughout the state of Missouri. We have a couple of our high schools that are targeted schools for certain areas. And what we found is not just looking at the academic data, but also looking at the social emotional learning data from the surveys and really attacking it in different ways by using the strategies to help students in the classroom with teachers, as well as strategies that can help students actually work in academic strategies. Because we know that students that have very little trust in a building won't do very well with strategies in terms of reading and math. I'm sure, Chris, you've actually experienced that yourself in the building, that if a student trusts their teacher or trusts their principal, or you use certain strategies to help them behaviorally or social emotionally, they're going to be more successful with the strategies you use in the classroom.
Absolutely, Chris, before you hop in on that, and actually we hear from everyone some kind of final thoughts or advice that you would have for folks as we transition to the live Q&A. Folks have asked and would love to hear a little bit more about that rich, robust data you're collecting on the social emotional learning front, and specifically the topics that you're measuring.
Sure. Chris, did you want to finish your thought real quick? Sorry about that.
I was just going to say that, at times students are not going to let us see their best until they know we can handle their worst. And I don't mean that in a negative context. But that to me, when I make that statement, speaks to that trust piece. I have to see that you are a trusted and caring adult that is truly invested in my life. And that is going to come at a different pace for all kids. That was going to be my thought on that to wrap it up.
Okay. So could you read that question one more time?
Yeah, so that was speaking to thinking about the different social emotional learning topics. The folks are asking about the specific social emotional learning topics that you're measuring and the data that you're able to get there.
So to begin with, the social emotional areas that we are measuring, definitely I can begin kind of reverse with the culture piece from the teachers and how we use some of that data very quickly at the building level. Chris, can you speak quickly to the culture piece from the Panorama data?
Right, and I'm actually pulling mine up so I can quick reference here a couple of things, specific topics for you, Mike. It is truly carving out time, just as the same way we would for academic data. We're truly trying to carve out that time for social emotional data, and that's been our strategy here. So it's internet challenges at the moment, apologize. But we can, through our dashboard, we can look specifically for those trends and trends in classrooms and trends across our school. So we've seen some of our biggest bumps over the last couple of years. Learning strategies has been really important for us. And I think that's specific, and why I reference that is, to me, that speaks directly to the engagement piece, of how engaging is my classroom, and a way that a teacher can quickly glean some data back from their students on that process of, if I'm not engaged in learning, I'm going to find ways to make sure I'm disengaged. And so learning strategies has been really important for us. And then the other big piece that's been a target and a focus for our building has been in the area of self-management. How do I manage overwhelming feelings? How do I how can I be okay when maybe things around me aren't feeling okay? And that's an adult skill as well as a kid skill. Do you have other thoughts on that, Jessica, or anything that you're doing?
Yeah, I was
with
going
your
to
team
say, I
building?
just pulled up. So I think the question was, which areas are we choosing as a district
So-
to collect data on? And so I just pulled up our dashboard. So I'll just read those off if that's helpful to the group. So the areas that we chose to collect data on, as Chris mentioned, self-management, another social awareness, learning strategies, which Chris mentioned, self-efficacy, grit, and growth mindset. So those are the big broad categories that we have chosen to collect data on. Christopher, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and how we came to that point was we had a team of people gather feedback through focus groups. And once we came back from those focus groups with students and parents over a year before we began the Panorama process, we then aligned it to our strategic plan and then decided to ask those survey questions towards those areas. And then now that is clearly aligned to our strategic plan. Now we're going to look at that again. Jessica, myself, Chris, and a bunch of us in this group are going to relook at those questions again and those areas that we're going to look towards, because some of them we're doing very well because we've done some strategies to improve. And so we might need to move on to a different set of questions, a different set of areas to work with.
And that perfectly encompasses all the different parts and components of this work that you mentioned throughout this conversation, right? Being able to identify and working with your students and your parents and identifying this profile, and then being able to think about the role social emotional learning can play in it, right? The different topics that you currently are measuring and using that as a benchmark for evaluating where you are, the needs that the student might have in those particular areas, supporting the whole student and thinking about that in terms of their attendance, behavior, and coursework outcomes. And actually, as we transition to hearing from the questions posed by the audience, wanted to start with one that we're seeing around your thoughts on MTSS and what that looks like for you all in your work.
Christopher, you want me to speak to that?
Well, yeah, why don't you start and I'll take over from where you end.
Sure. So I'll just a little bit of background because I think it is important to kind of the direction that our district has taken. So I'm coming up on my second anniversary in this role, almost completing 2 years. So prior to working in Liberty, I was a teacher in Liberty long ago, but kind of my in-between time, I worked on for a National Technical Assistance Center, and we implemented school change or school reform. We worked with state departments to do change in terms of MTSS with districts and schools across multiple states across the country. So my experience has been working directly with districts on how to make change in terms of MTSS. So I believe that part of why I was hired in this role is to bring the experience that I have with MTSS to Liberty Public Schools. It was a vision they had prior to me coming, but they were just needing some more support and experience in how to actually take the steps to get it up and going. The three things that we focus on, as I mentioned before, we're just getting started with building it. Anyone who's had any experience with MTSS knows it's a massive undertaking. Moving everybody in one direction around tiered supports takes a lot. It takes, obviously, with Christopher's role with assessment evaluation, it also takes curriculum and instruction, it takes professional development. So all the different aspects of what we do as a district are involved with MTSS. It's a big undertaking. But we've started with kind of simplifying it into 3 big buckets that we've been just starting to teach our school teams about what MTSS is. And those buckets are, the first thing you have to have is data. So what data sources do we have that we need to be looking at in order to make decisions? Okay, so, and that's where Panorama comes in, because they've provided us with an SEL data set that we didn't have in the past. And then as we move forward with our student success data dashboard, it will be combining those data sources across the different domains to have those conversations. The second big bucket is teams. So once we have our data, what teams do we have in place that are going to come together to talk about that data and then make instructional decisions? So first we have to have the data. Then we have to have our teams come together on a regular basis to talk about the data. And then the last piece are our tiered instruction, our tiered supports that we're going to provide. So what are we providing to all students? in the areas of academics, SEL, and behavior? And then what are we providing to some and few students in those same areas? And then what supports do we need to provide as a district? And then how do each of the teams, or how do each of the school teams build their structures together in order to make the decisions that are appropriate for those teams? So I think that simplifies it down, but I think those 3 buckets are really where we're starting with MTSS. What do we have in terms of data? What teams do we need to have in place? And then what tiered supports do we need to have in order to support the whole system?
So within Panorama, it's really these 2 main surveys that we're giving, which is student competency measures and student supports and environments. And then what happens from there is we choose from those surveys topics. And those topics that Chris just mentioned were social awareness, self-efficacy, so on and so forth, that you can choose from. So Jessica's talking about how you can take that data and put it into place, working with teams, going through processes. And really what Panorama has done by having their survey and new systems in place has forced us to look at how we react to the data, how we go from awareness to action, and how we're working through to help students get better at getting better and really understanding themselves.
Well, a key thing I'd like to highlight from the building perspective is that tiered support structure that Jessica kind of talked about. You know, there are things that all students need. There are things that some students need, and then there's a small percentage of students, luckily in our case, there's a small percentage of students that need that highest level of support. So it is a tiered and progressive approach to meeting the needs of students on the social emotional level.
Do we have another question? I'm sorry about that. We went a little far on that one.
I think that actually really speaks to a lot of, and answers a bunch of the questions folks had around, like, how are you collecting data around social emotional learning? How are you acting on the data? You perfectly summarized that, Christopher, by noting the awareness to the action, and then tying that to the points earlier from Chris and Jessica around, this is how we are approaching multi-tiered system support. Chris, you perfectly articulated that equity piece of like recognizing the different needs for folks. So how do you, in the same way you talk about bringing folks along this larger change management, how do you bring folks along in the execution of delivering some of those tiered supports, particularly teachers, and what does that look like for you all?
Well, for me, it's been that gradual release of just the same way I want teachers to model that in the classroom. In a lot of ways, we're doing that with our teams. So we have kind of a grade level team structure in our building. We have kind of what would be typically described as a vertical team structure in our building. We call them work groups at Schumacher. And so we come together and work around challenges and opportunities and strategies. So I've led and I lead, or I have my counseling staff lead, really, you know, hand in hand facilitation through these strategies and attempts. The playbook has been a great tool for us as well to go in and have kind of ready-made lessons and ideas that we can use. So there are times literally we will sit down and facilitate that lesson that a teacher could take right back to their classroom out of playbook. We've done that in a team meeting. Or our counselors have gone into the classroom and modeled that for a teacher just to help really hone in and identify those specific skills and some strategies that students could use.
I would go along with that, as well as students being able to articulate their own data in itself. So we're the emphasis of really second year of really working with this information. But at one point, we do want our students to be able to look at this and look at the strategies and work together with the teachers to determine the right strategies. So for example, you know, right now, this is interesting times. And during these interesting times, a lot of our students are feeling some anxiety. And one of those students, and I'll be honest with you and being a little vulnerable here, is my daughter. She's having some problems with self-efficacy. And so the other day we went on to Playbook, and we talked about a certain strategy within self-efficacy that's called Rosebud Thorn. And that playbook that we use, that strategy that we use with Rosebud Thorn, allowed my daughter to communicate a little bit better through her anxiety. I also, the other day, had to use a box and breathing technique with her, because that's going to help her during this time to really think of those safe places where she can be. And so even during a time where we cannot be face-to-face with students, this system can help you with parents and teachers to really look at strategies to help immediately, or even to incorporate in the home to be successful, because their success at home breeds success also in our buildings with Mr. Gabriel and Dr. Meisenheimer.
Wow, I really thank you so much for sharing that. application, that personal experience really helps to like articulate the critical importance of all of this and how this relates to our lives, right, in a professional standpoint as well as personally. And you talked a little bit about what this looks like in terms of the teams of like your team and your family, as well as what it looked like in your interaction with Chris and Dr. Meisenheimer. Can you share a little bit more about what the interactions for the various school and district teams has looked like, and then how they're accessing that information, how they're looking at these same data points you talked about? What does the team interaction look like? And speak to that a little bit.
Sure. Dr. Meisenheimer and Chris could say that they've seen presentations over and over again so much that's the same consistent message. But we are really allowing this to be a grassroots effort, that we plant some seeds across for people to grow and learn and to actually grow one another. I will say, though, it's very interesting when we show the data at first, if you're new to Panorama, our teachers didn't quite accept that data right away. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, there was hesitancy and question, you know, of how do we know this is valid? I don't know that my students understood the questions. And so again, there was that framing opportunity. You know, I could have sat there and I said, you know, yeah, you're right. They may not have understood, or yeah, they didn't understand. But we framed it in the sense of, so what are we going to do? What can we do about that? Instead of, you know, living in that, you know, the hurt locker a little bit of this isn't working. Let's talk about what we're going to do about it. Let's take action here.
And sometimes obstacles and pathways lead to discoveries. And so what we did was, when we look at the data, we really look at the whole set of how our students answered based on the possible responses. And what we were finding on a lot of the data was some of the students in particular areas like self-efficacy or social awareness, the students were right on the edge to choosing the side that was positive. Right. And what we started to do in buildings was to ask in focus groups to students to say, you know, 30% or 40% of your friends here have chosen this response. What would it take for us to do for you to choose a 4 or 5 or more likely or most likely? And it really gave us a reflection process to see there's some things that we are doing that aren't connecting with students, and things that we do every day that we think are tremendously effective, and we're finding out maybe it's not as effective as we thought.
Mm-hmm. About getting and giving feedback, you know, closing that, again, I referenced this earlier, closing
Yes.
that feedback loop of, I think I'm doing one thing, but here's what my consumer, I guess to put it in a different term, my consumer, my students in my classroom, this is the product that they're receiving and how they feel about it. No one is intentionally doing anything to isolate or alienate, but that's sometimes how kids feel. And so we get to help identify that thought and that emotion that they're having. And that's also speaking and teaching towards that social emotional maturity that we want to impart with students and help them grow and understand in themselves.
And Chris, thank you so much. That serves as like the perfect way to really kind of wrap up there. And doing so by hearing from Doug, as he has the fortunate opportunity to be able to work with you, Chris, to work with you, Jessica, Christopher, and many folks in roles like yours. And Doug, would love to hear from you, kind of like a synthesis about some of the advice or insights you learned from your experience supporting folks in these roles and their efforts around change management.
Sure thing. Yeah. Two things that, and it's just so it's so inspiring to hear you all talk at the end of, you know, having, you know, working so closely with you. Two things that I think you all do well, and I don't know if you know how well you do them, but I want to pause, name it, so that others, the more than 100 people who are listening, scaling up things, learning things that work and then scaling them is one thing that you do well, and then focusing is a second thing that you all do well. So as Jessica was speaking about small successes leading into big successes, you all do that pretty close to naturally, I think, because you're standing on such a strong foundation of trust that Chris mentioned. So, you know, picking the handful of champions, it also has to do, I think, with the size of your district, 20 schools, you know, like picking a handful of champions that you know and trust personally translates to about 20 to 25% of your buildings, who can then go out and you can learn from them how well something works. You can tweak it before you scale it across the district. So that's something that I think speaks to both the level of trust you have and also to your size. The other thing that I think is worth pausing and naming is, it's not as if Chris is having conversations with his staff about improving SEL. So generally, they're down at the topic level. Even a specific question that hits to the heart and head of their community at that moment. You know, it's not like, what are we going to do to improve SEL? It's what question, you know, are you going to think about 3 hours from now? What is still going to be on your mind a week from now? What do you think can actually improve outcomes for kids? And then we focus on that. I know, Chris, you've done that with self-management. Could you maybe just say a word or two for the 100 or more listening? How did you go from survey on SEL to actually self-management is what really matters for us right now?
Yeah, and I think if my teachers or a teacher from my building was here, something that they would probably say they're tired of hearing me say is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer or the response is one bite or one spoonful at a time. So we could look at all of the things that are out there and we just had to pick one thing. And there's that worry or that risk, or we're going to pick the wrong thing. And what we came to as an understanding and a reality for us is it doesn't matter as much that what we pick, we've got to pick something. We've got to start somewhere. And then that's how you see that small incremental change and that laser-like focus that you referenced, Doug, of we're going to pick one thing and we're going to take action on that one thing. And we're going to gather the evidence and feedback to see how we're doing with what we said we were going to do, one bite at a time.
I also think on that one thing too, Chris, that you do very well is not only the actions you're taking place, but now let's look at the strategies and feed each other as we're looking to improve. And you're doing that with your counselor, you're doing it with your teams, with social workers, and you're doing it with teachers to know that everyone is here for every child. And that is a consistent message that we have throughout the district. And it comes from Dr. Meisenheimer's group all the way to Mr. Gabriel's team.
Yeah, I don't think any one of us has the mindset and the idea that this is my work. We live in the world and the reality, this is our work. And so every member of our team is a valuable component of the process. And everyone's going to need to contribute, and they might have that one thing that we're missing. And so my job is to hire good people and get out of the way and let them do their job and empower them to do so.
And with that, I want to thank you all and thank everyone for their questions. You all for making yourselves available to be able to answer their questions. Again, if we did not get to one of your questions from the audience, we'll make sure to send out follow-up resources that will continue this conversation. There's so much rich learning happening, so many tidbits that are sticking with me in particular. And we'll make sure we'll continue the conversation in other formats, and we encourage you to reach out to info@panoramaed.com. As we wrap up, we kind of wanted to make sure that we covered a few of the key themes that we heard that were really important for folks, particularly really thinking about the critical role that social emotional learning plays in the whole student, and that serving as an additional frame of reference or entry point for us to be able to learn about our students and thinking about them holistically. When we think about why they might be missing class or having issues with attendance, like you heard earlier, thinking about what are some of the root causes and perhaps maybe the chicken and egg effect of social emotional learning, and then supporting that as well as behavior, as well as course performance, but thinking about the whole student as reflected through these key building blocks. And when it comes specifically to social emotional learning, we heard some questions around how are you measuring, how are you getting some of that data, what are you looking at? And we've made available resources for districts and school leaders who are interested in getting that insight into their students, specifically in the areas of their skills and their abilities, as well as the environmental effects and factors that play a role in the development of the specific social emotional learning skills, as well as adult capacity in the form of teachers and the supports that they're providing. We heard earlier about how this district is looking at, learning strategies, is looking at really engagement and having social emotional learning be that flashlight as opposed to a hammer and be able to provide insights into how we best support our students. And as we saw the panel really model the interconnectivity of the various moving pieces that go into pulling this off and this being shared our work, as we heard earlier, really think about that in terms of also the moving pieces of the different data points and data streams that are available for districts to look at that are coming from assessments for literacy and for math. Also the key information that's contained in our student information system and Panorama building integrations with those so you can centralize all of your key data points that make up your profile of your students and being able to see where there's opportunities to shine that flashlight on growth and intervention for those students. Because once we have a detailed understanding and we're analyzing all of those data points in one place, we can identify where there's opportunities to assist those students by indicating if they're on track or they're at risk, especially looking at that in a real-time data We're excited to support you all in your journey and be able to do that. And specifically for the purpose of monitoring those dashboards to see some of those trends that enable you to take a more proactive approach, specifically around intervention, and making sure we're thinking about the teachers having the capacity and ability to deliver what those students need, especially having heard from you all about the critical importance of understanding the detailed difference for all of those students and meeting them where they're at. That's a theme that really resonated and I heard today. And being able to have all of that in a coordinated approach toward achieving that vision outlined in the strategic plan or in our profile of a graduate, having the coursework, attendance, behavior all in one place, to interventions, to make this streamlined process, to be able to focus more so on delivering the supports that our students need. And with that too, we also think about some of the key elements that go into pulling all of this off. And you heard from that from Doug. I'd love to have you, Doug, share a little bit more about the role strategic advising plays in supporting districts and partners.
Sure thing. I'll focus on this middle offering, which is what Liberty is engaged in. So the one on the left, executive briefings, those are, think about a 2-hour in-person synthesis of data, insights, and recommendations for like a district leadership team after you administer and get data. On the far right, system advising, that's more, districts looking for support, really setting up their multi-tiered system of support and rolling it out. The middle option, coaching and consultations, this is what we've engaged with Liberty this year. Chris Gabriel, one of 5 schools that's participating in these. And these are, consultative touch points with not just a school leader, but the school leader's team. So Chris Gabriel and several of his teacher leaders come together at the end of each student survey administration, and together we make sense of the data. It's actually much more about voice than data. So we're actually listening to students and they survey teachers as well. So in some cases, listening to teacher voice and thinking about, what we're hearing, do we really want to focus on? And then who's going to do what by when to take a step towards action with that. So that's really, we mentioned that before. The consultations has been how we've tried to focus on something like self-management and then move from field to real.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Doug. I really appreciate having your perspective and as well as perspective of everyone on this panel. And as we talked about, this really serving as just one data point in this continuing dialogue and thinking about how we innovate and improve and providing, support specific to the needs of our students. We want to make sure we continue this conversation, and we will make available strategies to address some of the top MTSS challenges that we've heard in this conversation today, as well as in our conversation supporting districts throughout the country. And want to make sure we will share with everyone so they have access to this MTSS guide that goes through that in detailed fashion, as well as an upcoming panel specifically on MTSS on April 2nd, specifically focused on actionable steps you all can take to be able to address some of those challenges. Also, we strongly encourage folks to join Panorama's virtual community, especially in this moment as we recognize the importance of having access to online learning opportunities. We provide the opportunity for folks to gather and to meet and engage in these kind of conversations with other educators in similar roles, students, community members across the country, and have made available these different topics for folks that are relevant to different opportunities for learning. Make sure to register here at this link, and we'll make sure to include this in the follow-up resources for folks as well. Thank you.